Hello, welcome to Subro Sessions. My name is Leon Skaf. I'm a partner at White and Williams in the subrogation department. I'm here with my colleague and partner, Matt Ferrie. Say hello, Matt.
Hello, everyone. It's great to be back on Subro Sessions again.
And our guest today here is the president and chief investigator of Find the Cause Investigation and retired detective sergeant, John Lightbody. Hi, John.
Good morning. Thank you for having me on.
Of course, thank you for coming. Today, we're going to be talking about a topic that we expect to be a series here entitled How to Make the Public Sector an Ally and Not a Public Enemy. So, first, gentlemen, you having a good summer?
I'm more of a fall guy, Leon. I like football. I don't like the sun. I'm happy the Eagles are back.
Mine is going well. We just had a nice small family vacation coming off the holidays, so we're moving forward.
Good. And Matt and I went on, I believe, almost identical Alaskan cruises about 2 weeks apart. I hear that Matt had about 60-degree weather and rainy, and I had 75-degree and sunny days. Is that right, Matt?
Yeah, I want to talk about that.
All right. All right. So let's talk about the topic today, which is how to deal with our subrogation investigation, kind of coinciding at the same time as the public sector's investigation. So we're going to discuss a little bit about the role of the public sector, what they're doing, why they're out there, and then how we can kind of coincide and work with them, not against them, so we can both, reach the goals that we're working on. We're going to dive into some specifics here with John, but first, just to give a quick summary of the attorney side, my perspective here too. First, then Matt. Generally, what I've learned is to play nice, be diplomatic. From the first point, when you're out on a scene and you're talking to a fire investigator, a fire marshal, or someone early in the life of a claim, keep in mind that down the road, this may be someone you're trying to get assistance from, someone you're trying to get documentation from, someone that you might even be deposing. So, it's really smart to kind of think two steps ahead of the game here, where this might be someone that you're going to need later on to help you. So, even if you might run into some conflict early on about where a fence is or where some tape is or where evidence has been moved, do your best to kind of think strategically about that. That particular public sector investigator may eventually become one of your own private investigators, may currently be a private investigator. So it's a small community, even though we're kind of working, across the country. So to keep that in mind, that we're always working on both sides here, whether it's public or private, whether it's plaintiff or defense. So make friends, not enemies, I guess is the number one point there. But at the same time, I think it's also important that we also have a job to do. We have a subrogation investigation to conduct, and we need to do it comprehensively and thoroughly, which means that sometimes you got to stand your ground. Sometimes you need to tell the investigator, look, this is how it has to be done. And you may have to push back, whether it's in a deposition, whether it's in discovery, but we'll get to all that later. Matt, any tips from your perspective?
I mean, not much that. You make some great points. I especially like you pointing out long-term goals in addition to short-term goals, where you're talking about the public sector fire investigator you're dealing with on this case, maybe in the private sector in a couple of years. It's nice that you would already have a relationship developed with that person when that time comes. So, Leon, you're playing chess. The rest of us are just playing checkers.
That's right. Story of my life. So we're going to discuss in other episodes, I think further down the line, maybe some topics about discovery, some topics about depositions and things like that. But in this episode, we're going to focus a little bit more early on the investigation, right, Matt?
Yes, and just to add a couple quick things on what you were saying before, Leon, it's important to remember that in any investigation that we conduct, the public sector investigation can help us or it can hurt us. Now, there's some scenarios where we can't do anything about the public sector investigation hurting us. I mean, perhaps there'll be a scenario where they've seen the same physical evidence we had, they've obtained the same information that we have, and they come up with a different conclusion, and that can happen. But what you don't want to happen is us not getting necessary information, access to necessary evidence, just generally speaking, just not getting good cooperation from the public sector because of your attitude or just not being respectful, not being professional, not being courteous. You don't want to be the reason, and you certainly don't want your behavior to be the reason that the public sector is not assisting us in our investigation. And that's something we always want to keep in mind when we're quarterbacking these things.
Matt Ferry, all around good guy. So, John, why don't you tell us a little bit about your background?
So I began my fire service career, which evolved into what I do today, when I was 16 in the Eastover Volunteer Fire Company in Toms River. And because of that, I was able to be appointed as a career firefighter at the Naval Air Engineering Center, Lakehurst, New Jersey, when I was 18 years old, 3 months out of high school. So I was pretty fortunate to jump out of that and right into my career. So I spent 8.5 years there. I was promoted a couple of times to where I started to hone my code enforcement type skills. And part time while working at Lakehurst, I was a part time fire inspector for Toms River Township in Jackson Township. So at 26, I was appointed to the prosecutor's office arson unit then. And subsequently, over the next 18 and a half years or so, I developed and was the architect of the arson task force in Ocean County, which was very successful. And it goes back to, I think, what you guys had both alluded to was cooperation in getting to know and involve the local detectives, fire prevention inspectors, fire marshals, and other agencies. Our task force that we built was only done because of that cooperation. We put on classes, etc. So after 25 years of government work, I retired in 2004, and I've been performing investigations in the private sector for 20 years now, I guess it is. In May of 2022, I opened Find the Cause Investigations. Much to my wife, she wasn't happy, but now she won't let me close it. So you figure that out. So
You're raking in the big bucks.
well, I don't know. You got to see what's coming in, right? So it's working out well. I mean, we have a couple of investigators that work with us. We handle not only fire origin and cause. In my career, I've been sworn as an expert and approved as an expert in origin and cause investigations, as well as fire suppression strategies and tactics. And in my staff of personnel, we have fire code experts, building code experts, and engineers. Those people that I want to use and rely on. I don't pay them. It comes through, the firms or the insurance companies, but they certainly are a good resource, and we provide those services or at least access to those services.
Right. Well, thank you for joining us. Obviously, John, based on your credentials, you're a great guest to give us perspective from both sides of the aisle. So why don't we jump in with some questions, Matt?
John, from your perspective, how would you describe the respective roles of the public sector investigator and any private sector investigators in a fire investigation?
Well, the respective roles are very much consistent if they're performed properly. So, look, in the public sector, who do we have? We have the fire inspectors, we have the fire marshals, which are pretty much consistent, and their role and responsibility is to determine the origin cause of the fire and then subsequently determine if there's any code violations that may have caused or contribute to the cause of the fire or the spread of the fire, as well as identify multiple fires, say with a particular product, and then they report to the CPC. So their other side of that is to prevent these fires from reoccurring, right? So that's their job. And how do they do that? They do it exactly the same way the private sector should be doing it. Now, our private sector, as you know, is to determine the origin and cause of the fire. We do it the same way. If you do it properly, you're going to shovel, you're going to delayer, you're going to photograph, you're going to reconstruct, you're going to wash down the floor, and you're going to come to the area of origin and subsequent point of origin and identify the heat sources. So, in addition, I'm a firm believer, look, that every fire investigation on a public and private side should have a fire inspection conducted at the same time. And what does that do for us? That tells us that maybe doors that were supposed to be fire doors are propped open, the automatic magnetic doors that were supposed to close during a fire alarm failed, any suppression or detection or passive systems failing. That on our side would be an issue to pursue, right, on the subrogation side. And on the other side, is there any of these issues that caused or contribute to serious bodily injury and or death? Now, because the fire is not intentionally set, doesn't mean there's still not criminal charges to be had. So, C-4018 in the New Jersey Criminal Code allows for fire code violations that caused or contribute to the cause of the fire or serious bodily injury, significant bodily injury, or death, chargeable under the criminal code. And we have a pretty good case in Tom's River that they put together with those charges. So it's all kind of the same. Are they looking for the incendiary fire and a pursuit? Yeah. And unfortunately, we have the local authorities, inspector said, it wasn't suspicious circumstances or it wasn't incendiary. So we left it for the private guys. And without being vulgar, that's crap, right? That's wrong. You're not doing their job right. And that's where I stand on it.
We keep it real here on this podcast, so thank you, John. So, John, do you have an opinion on whether or not the role or purpose of the public sector investigator has evolved over the years, and how would you describe how it's evolved?
Well, look, in the 1980s, I was involved in this before NFPA 921 which, as most all know, is the guide for fire and explosion investigation. So I was involved with this long before that arrived, right? So I think the evolution of that document and the expansion of that document every 3 years. I mean, when I first saw that document, it might have been 30 pages. Now it's in excess of 400 pages, right? And I think it better gives the guide to the local authority on how to perform the investigation, right? So before this document, we had a structure in the report, action taken, we received the assignment. What we do when we got there, everything was structured, but it wasn't structured in what's, quote, scientific method, unquote, right? But it was structured. And if you did it right, you just slid over the terms. But I think that evolution of the 921 document helps the local authority, helps to understand it and what their specific roles and responsibilities are in conjunction with the laws. In New Jersey, it's the Uniform Fire Code that requires every fire official in every municipality to perform their investigation.
Yeah, let's stick with 921 for a second, John, because it's obviously a very important guide for the private guys and the public guys for our subrogation cases too, when we're getting into expert conclusions and reports. So we all know it makes for a better investigation when public and private sector investigators work cooperatively. Are there specific NFPA 921 provisions which refer to that type of cooperation and assistance?
Yes, specifically in chapter 15, planning the investigation, without reading the whole chapter. This is out of a 2024 edition. 15.1.2, it says outside sources can be gained through local or state building officials, specifically addressed are private agencies. So included in that private sector are private sector investigators, the insurance company, and the law firms who retain them. So in that specific section, that's where it is. And 15.2.8 is the purpose of the investigation also addresses public and private sector investigators' cooperation. And in fact, 0.81 says mutual respect and cooperation in the investigation is required. So there you go. It's right in 921. It's required.
Now, John, as a lawyer, when I see that language, it reeks of, coming from disputes. It sounds like, they wrote this language because private guys and public guys were butting heads. I mean, do you think that's true? And how did that become necessary to include that kind of language in 921?
Well, I do. I mean, for the same reasons we're talking about, is looking for that cooperation. I think, look, the fire service as a whole and fire codes and building codes generally are what? They're reactive. And what does that mean? Very few times are we proactive. We may see a situation, write a code, and say, this may happen. But let's look at the history of codes. The Great Adventure Fire, 8 kids died. There's a whole new set of codes relative to amusement parks and haunted houses. The college fires in Seton Hall, we had multiple deaths and serious bodily injuries. Now in New Jersey, we react to that. What do? We sprinkler every college. So it's a reactive thing. So it was there a conflict that probably brought about this verbiage? Absolutely. I agree with that. And there still are conflict. And I'll tell you why I think that is. And when I teach, one of my first questions I have mixed between fire inspectors, detectives, ATF guys and gals, and et cetera, throughout the state of New Jersey. My first question: how many people here believe that we are an ego driven industry? And that's a fact. I mean, let's be serious. I had a sergeant tell me I trip over mine once in a while. But the point of the matter is, look, nobody wants to be challenged. Nobody wants to be questioned for the most part. Those who want to do it right will sit and listen. And when you spoke earlier, counselor, about, having to depose these persons, but they still come up with a different conclusion. Well, I think then you have to rely yourself on the training, education, experience, and expertise of the individual that's authoring the report or giving you that conclusion that conflicts with your experts.
Well, John, let me tell you, maybe you should try an egoless industry like the law.
Egoless, yeah.
You beat me to that joke, Leon.
All right. So let's move on. Sometimes we're seeing institutional obstacles to cooperation. Fire marshals who are told not to speak to private investigators by their superiors, fire reports not being provided without a subpoena, etc. In your experience, do individual fire marshals want to help the private sector investigators, or do you find that they are happy to have these, institutional obstacles in place?
So that's kind of two pronged. Yes, I agree that most fire marshals, and we use that term, or inspectors, they do want to cooperate. And I could tell you that the newer investigators that we have the opportunity, look, there's a core group of instructors out there at least in New Jersey, that we have an opportunity to teach and get excited about what we do and how we can assist them. And we're starting to mesh that in the classroom, and it's important. But I think most of the hurdles that we deal with are generally coming from supervisors and administrations. So your municipal administration, your county and state. And I think that's primarily because they're trying to keep themselves out of any other civil litigation outside of what they're doing in their role and responsibility. So, one particular case comes to mind. We have a double homicide in Ocean County. It's not solved, because of whatever circumstances. And there's no statute of limitations there. But we had to go through a civil trial. My concern was putting our criminal case out to the civil side long before a criminal matter may come up. I can tell you it's almost 30 years ago, but you don't want to do that. So that's when the prosecutors involved in the case try to quash the subpoenas for the information. And today, with the advent of OPRA, Open Public Records Act, and FOIA, the Federal Freedom of Information Acts, we were getting a lot of better cooperation and information, but they just started to suppress some of the information that's allowed to go out on that in New Jersey within the last couple of months.
So, John, when you're dealing with those types of situations, whether it's institutional obstacles to obtaining information or just a fire marshal that doesn't want to return your call, doesn't want to send you the fire report, what do you think the best ways are to ultimately obtain what we need for our investigation?
I think Mr. Skaf had put it right. It's all about diplomacy, right? So my main approach when I call the local authority, if I don't know them, my opening line is, look, I'm from Find the Cause Investigations. I was retained by a specific insurance company to do the origin and cause of the fire. My concern is I want to ensure that I'm not interfering with any investigation that you may be conducting. So what does that mean? They may be conducting an arson investigation and the scene is still held. No, you can't go there. And then you get cooperation. Like I've worked with the ATF from the private side. They let me come down. They don't let me in while they're in there, but they let me document after doing what they do. So that approach, I think, says to that public investigator, hey, listen, he's not here to attack me or scrutinize my investigation. He's here to assist. So what can I do to help you? Look, you can't act as their agency, right, in the private sector, in the law side. But what you can do is say, look, if you need heavy equipment, we have it. If you need fencing, we have it. Tell us what we can do to assist you with your investigation. And that's a whole different world. And you guys both alluded to it today in our past conversations.
Thank you, John. Well, there's obviously a lot to talk about here on this topic, and we will be talking about it on subsequent episodes on this specific issue. But we appreciate your time, John. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you,
Okay.
John.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening to this episode of Subro Sessions. Be sure to listen to the next episode of Subro Sessions, which will be released on the third Tuesday of next month, October 15th in this case. You can find past episodes of the podcast and relevant case updates on the Subrogation Strategist blog, all available at whiteandwilliams.com.
We would like to remind everyone that the contents of this podcast are intended for general informational purposes only, and you are urged to consult a lawyer concerning your own situation with respect to any specific legal question you may have. The podcast should not be construed as legal advice for a particular situation or to give a legal opinion on any specific facts or circumstances. Prior results do not guarantee a similar outcome.